The beacon cut the night of space like a flare dropped into a cave. On the outpost deck, floodlights washed the hulls in hard white, while Mark Vance stood under a rattling gantry and listened to the cry for assistance roll across the comm. No chatter, only coordinates and a simple statement. Drive fault. Structural integrity nominal. Requesting repair. Payment authorized. He looked through the viewport at the blinking red pin on the dark field. The station's duty officer glanced over with a worried twitch. The sector was quiet because of the peace talks, not in spite of them. Traffic had been rerouted, patrols thickened, everyone nervous about the first handshake in a century. An anonymous ship with a sick engine at the rim looked like a trap dressed as a favor. Mark rubbed the scar along his forearm and watched the telemetry one more time. He went anyway. His shuttle's clamps released with a slam, and he guided the stubby craft into open space. Life support indicators glowed green. He checked his med kit by touch without looking. He had replaced the hemostatic pads last month and replenished the saline. He had treated more scrapes and burns than bullets in the last few years, and he preferred it that way. The beacon's vector sharpened, and the ship came into view, a knife silhouette with a predator's stillness. He knew the profile from database silhouettes. Rylkath design favored swept plates and lean spines that made human engineers mutter about maintenance access and crew comfort. The comm chimed. A female voice, cool as iced air. Daggerwind acknowledges your approach. Docking port aft 12. Payment on completion. No names. No small talk. He matched velocity and slid into the lock. The hatch cycled with a hiss, and a star of frost skittered across the gasket and melted. He stepped into a corridor that smelled like metal shavings and bitter tea. 5 Rylkath waited, tall and narrow, skin with a subtle luster like wet wood, no weapons he could see. Their eyes took him in, then moved on as if they catalogued anyone who entered their gravity. The commander introduced herself as Saren. Her voice carried a courteous veneer that did not soften the calculation behind it. She gestured with 3 slender fingers and led him into a chamber that opened like a gill to the engine bay. The main drive shroud had a blackened seam. A panel lay open at a careful angle on the deck, not dropped. Someone here respected their tools. Mark pulled on thermal gloves, engaged the bay's safety clamps, and clipped a tether to a ring near the casing. He did his checks out loud out of habit. Power isolated. Pressure equalized. Chemical fire suppression ready. He pulled the shroud and winced. A power distribution manifold had overheated. Insulation bubbled at the edges. He smelled the sweet stink of cooked polymer. He felt heat ghosts through the gloves. He used his scope to peer at the coil rows and saw expansion bowing like a ripple in a pond. Nothing catastrophic yet. Bad enough. 12 hours, he said. Maybe less if nothing else is lying to me. Saren nodded. We accept 12. He prepped tools and set a lidded tray beside him, the way he learned during field triage. Parts organized. Clean space. No sharp edges pointed up. He had lost blood that way once, and never forgot. He cut away blistered insulation and replaced it with a roll from his kit. He checked the mount points for hairline cracks with a dye that glowed under his light. He spoke little. The engineers in his head did the talking while his hands moved. The Rylkath watched in turns. They did not talk among themselves in the engine bay. When he asked for a coupling not on their manifest, they directed him to a storage corridor near the crew commons. He walked past an open entry and kept walking, then paused. Voices, a whisper strain. He leaned against the wall and tightened the strap on his tool case while the words drifted out. Drive refit done in 12. He leaves. We burn to the fold and run dark. The Kreth delegation enters orbit at dawn over Geneva. The relay drone hits their escort. Markers in the debris point to a human dissident group. War resumes. Contracts flow again. A softer voice asked if Earth would search for a saboteur at the talk site. Another voice, sharp with disdain, said there would be no saboteur to find. Then a mention of a name that tightened his ribs. Vance, the negotiator. The old man brings a smile and a pen. We bring a fuse and a match. Mark kept his face level. He did not breathe louder. He adjusted his case and stepped forward. A Rylkath rounded the corner and met him eye to eye. It stared 1 second too long. He looked down at his request slate and held it up with a shrug. Need a 7mm thermal coupling with a wedge seat. Yours are metric, not ours. I can adapt it if I get the right seat. The Rylkath blinked. Down the next aisle, third locker. Code is on the panel. He walked away with the part and a steady pace. His chest felt tight until he hit the engine bay again and latched his tether. He told his hands to work, and they obeyed. He reorganized the schedule in his head. Each step shaved minutes. He skipped a non-critical burnish on the casing and chose a faster curing adhesive with comparable thermal tolerance. He inspected the manifold while the adhesive set. The fix would hold. He had done enough battlefield patches in his time to know when a ship needed love and when it needed a miracle. This one needed a competent patch and a fair warning. It would get one of those. He asked for water and took a measured sip. He set the cup down and rolled his shoulder. An old strain flared from the angle he had held for too long. He stopped. Stretches were not bravado. He braced his forearm against his chest, pulled his wrist gently to lengthen the deltoid, held for 20 seconds, breathed, checked that there was no tingling in his fingers, no nerve pinch. He rotated slowly to keep the joint lubricated and went back to work. He taped the cup upright so he would not knock it over. Many injuries come from small, careless moments. He had promised himself he would not repeat them. In the Commons, the Rylkath voices changed. Fewer words, lower register, the cadence of a decision. Saren did not come back to the bay for an hour. When she did, she stood by the threshold and watched the new manifold hum. He gave her a report. He did not mention the overheard plan. He did not mention the name she had spoken. He let the numbers do the talking. We are at less than 1/10 of a degree variation across the coil line. Output stable at 84% of rated until the insulators finish curing under power. You can run at maneuvering thrust now. No hard burns for 2 hours. Payment transferred, she said. You work quickly. He glanced at the chronometer. 10 hours since docking. He kept his voice even. It helps to have a good toolbox. While she watched, he reassembled the shroud and cleaned the workspace, as if the order of the deck could protect him from the disorder of what he had heard. He returned tools to their slots, logged the parts he had used, and asked for a final systems check from their console. The engineer posted there was thin and impatient. Mark pointed to a flicker in the gauge cluster. Your fuel level indicator jumps when you toggle to reserve. See it. Could be a sensor gain issue. I can calibrate it if you want. The engineer started to say no. Saren cut in with a gesture. Do it. He took 5 minutes with a screwdriver and a falsified baseline he fed through a test port. He did not change the flow. He only changed what the needle believed when it listened to its own heartbeat. When the tests ended, the gauge sat proud and full. He smiled like an exhausted mechanic who liked his work a little too much and climbed off the scaffold. Saren walked him to the lock. She handed him a small case of credit wafers, then a sealed packet of dried fruit, as if the gesture could pass for warmth. He thanked her. He did not refuse free calories in space. Behind her shoulder, a young Rylkath watched him with a hunger that was not about food. Mark kept his gaze on the commander. I will file a service report with the registry, he said. It helps future techs if they see the pattern on this model. She inclined her head the way a person acknowledges the existence of a storm beyond a sealed window. Safe travels. He felt the lock close like a hand on his back. In the shuttle, he ran his checklists twice. He looked at his knuckles. A shallow cut he had not noticed during the job had scabbed with a line of sealant smeared across it. He peeled the sealant and cleaned the skin with an antiseptic wipe. He checked capillary refill by pressing his nail and watching the color return. Less than 2 seconds. Normal. He covered the cut with a sterile strip and flexed gently. No pain beyond surface. No swelling. He breathed and felt his heart slow from a steady drum to a steady hum. He undocked, pivoted, and powered away. The stars barely moved. That was how it always felt when the distance was honest. He set the autopilot for the outpost and then for Earth beyond it. He leaned back. He thought of calling his father. He did not. They had rules for moments like this. No unsecured channels. No chatter. On Daggerwind, behind sealed doors, Saren spoke a name. and another door opened to a room that smelled like a dry cave after summer. A crate sat in the center with a lock that required 2 hands to open. The crew did not look at one another as they made ready. No speeches. They had their work, and they had their fear, layered like lacquer. In Mark's shuttle, every panel glowed with the soft confidence of loyal instruments. He checked life support again because that was what you did when your stomach would not unknot on command. He told himself that the job was done. He told himself that his report about a sensor quirk could wait until he was an hour closer to a friendly hull. He watched the timer tick down. Far behind him, the knife-shaped ship turned its nose toward the fold and watched a lying needle praise a tank that could not carry them past noon. Closer still, in a dark rear compartment of Mark's shuttle, a weight shifted inside a crate, and a breath like a storm touched the metal with a sound like the first note before a symphony begins. He did not hear it. He set his chair back to neutral and locked his harness with a click that calmed him. He reached for the sealed packet of fruit and set it aside. If he ate now, he would only taste the engine bay on his tongue. He closed his eyes for a count of 5, long enough for a memory to surface. A crate, a different ship. A small, scaled head with fever-bright eyes. The smell of old blood and cheap disinfectant. He opened his eyes. He set the memory aside, not because he wanted to forget, but because the present asked for both hands and a clear mind. The stars held their ground. The shuttle carried him on. The game, already in motion, did not ask permission to begin. The sound reached him first, deep, resonant, and wrong for any system failure. It didn't echo like metal strain or the hiss of a faulty seal. It vibrated through the shuttle's ribs and into his bones. Mark's hands froze over the console. The noise came again, lower this time, ending with a rasp that could only belong to something alive. He unlocked his harness, stood slowly, and unlatched the sidearm compartment in the bulkhead. The pistol was a compact .40, not meant for shipboard hull penetrating power, but enough to drop most living things his size. He thumbed the safety without sound. His mind ticked through possibilities: smuggled cargo from the Daggerwind, a stowaway, a weaponized animal. None of those possibilities involved leaving the thing in the hold to wander. He stepped through the narrow mid-compartment, past tool lockers, and the emergency medkit bolted to the wall. The kit was stocked for 1 sterile gauze, pressure dressings, thermal blankets, IV fluids, splints. Not enough for major trauma from an apex predator encounter, but better than bare hands and hope. The cargo bay lights were dimmed for transit. Shadows pooled between crate stacks. The air smelled faintly of warm stone and ozone. He moved down the center line with measured steps, keeping the pistol low but ready. A shift of weight metal flexing under something heavy, then a shape detached from the far shadows, unfolding upward. The creature was immense, 8 feet from crown to heel, shoulders ridged with scales that caught the dim light. 4 arms hung at its sides, each ending in talons built to tear rather than grasp. Its long head tilted, nostrils flaring, and a slow hiss rolled from its throat. Its eyes locked on him, vertical pupils narrowing to thin blades. Mark raised the pistol, but didn't fire. He knew what he was looking at. Years ago, on a mission that had gone sideways in the belt, his squad had raided an illegal hunting facility. Among the cages, they'd found one of these smaller then, barely 5 feet, its scales dull with malnutrition, a jagged wound across its left shoulder seeping thick, dark blood. The wound pattern had been unique, a lazy L-shaped scar caused by an improvised spear. He'd cleaned it himself, flushing the gash with antiseptic, applying foam sealant, and dressing it with woven fiber bandages from his med kit. For 3 days, until an alien sanctuary ship arrived, he had fed it protein paste and kept it calm with soft tones and slow movements. This one had the same scar. Older now, the ridges grown over but not gone. The predator stepped forward. Talons clicked on the deck. Mark's finger rested on the trigger, but he didn't squeeze. Instead, he did the one thing his memory told him might matter. He lowered the pistol. The hiss deepened, becoming a rumble. The predator's upper right hand flexed like it was ready to swipe. Mark took a breath and tried the same soft whistle he had used in the belt 3 rising notes, then a pause, then one long low tone. He kept his free hand open and extended, palm out, not moving closer. The predator froze mid-step, its head tilted again, The rumble dropped to silence. Then, slowly, it closed the distance and lowered its massive head until its snout pressed against his chest. The weight of it forced him back a fraction, and he could feel the vibration of its breathing against his ribs. It remembered. Mark exhaled slowly. His body still hummed with adrenaline, but his hands were steady. He reached up and rested his palm along the ridge of its jawline, avoiding the sensitive gill slits. Its eyes softened, not in a human way, but in the way of an animal recognizing something familiar. The creature stepped aside and positioned itself between him and the cargo bay hatch, as if claiming that space as a guard post. It gave one last sniff at the air near the hatch, then settled into a low crouch, 4 arms resting like a spider at ease. Mark holstered the pistol but kept it unlatched. Whatever loyalty the predator felt, it was still an apex hunter, and instincts didn't vanish with recognition. He returned to the cockpit, the faint scrape of the predator's claws following him down the corridor. It didn't enter the flight deck, but it stayed close, just out of sight, breathing slow. He checked the nav display. The Daggerwind had vanished into fold space, still believing their tanks were full. If his recalibration held, they'd run dry in under an hour. He imagined the moment when their drives cut, the crew realizing they were adrift, the weight of options shrinking to none. Somewhere out there, the peace talks were still in motion. The Kreth delegation's shuttle would be on final approach to Earth's orbit by now. His father would be in Geneva, locked in a conference chamber surrounded by aides and security. Mark knew he needed to get there as soon as possible with what he'd overheard. The predator shifted in the corridor. Its claws scraped again, sharper this time, reacting to some distant sound Mark couldn't hear. He glanced at the environmental panel. No pressure drops, no foreign gases detected. Still, he reached for the internal camera feed and brought up the external hull view. Nothing but stars. He sat back, but his mind kept circling. He had patched bleeding arteries on battlefields, replaced engine cores in storm-black space, and ridden out hull breaches on emergency oxygen. But he had never flown home with an apex predator sitting in his ship like a personal bodyguard. It wasn't until 2 hours later, well past, when the Daggerwind's fuel should have given out, that he picked up a faint Kreth patrol signal on long-range scan. He didn't smile. Not yet. Behind him, the predator lifted its head, nostrils flaring again, as if it knew something in the black was about to change. The Kreth patrol vessel Shathari was built for intimidation, not comfort-sleek armor plates bristling with sensor arrays, and enough firepower to make even smugglers think twice before running. Mark watched it on the scanner, a slow-moving shadow threading across the void. It wasn't on an intercept course for him. Its trajectory pointed straight toward the last set of coordinates, where the Daggerwind had entered fold space. Perfect. He leaned back in his seat, careful not to let the tension show in his shoulders. This was the part of an op he didn't like, the waiting, while someone else's decisions determined the shape of the outcome. The predator in the corridor paced once, claws tapping rhythmically against the deck plating. On the Shathari, the Kreth commander would be picking up the Daggerwind's energy signature fading far too soon after departure, the telltale of an empty tank masquerading as a full one. Kreth crews were nothing if not methodical. They'd send a ping first civil frequency, non-aggressive. The Rylkath would stall, claim a systems glitch. Then the Kreth would escalate to boarding. Mark didn't need to imagine it in full. He had seen Rylkath crews under pressure before. They didn't shout, not at first. They splintered into factions, one ready to cut and run, another eager to bluff it out, and a third who wanted to fight regardless of odds. That blend of pride and paranoia always came to a boil fast. His hands tightened on the armrests as the minutes ticked by. He could almost picture the scene playing out. The Shathari dropping out of fold, dwarfed by the drifting Daggerwind, docking clamps biting into the Rylkath's sleek hull. Kreth Marines broad-shouldered, horned, their armor patterned with clan insignia flooding the airlock. The first Rylkath lie offered with a straight face. We suffered an unexpected fuel rupture. No distress signal? A comm fault. The Kreth captain leaning in, voice low, demanding access to navigation records. Then the search. Lockers opened, datapads confiscated, encrypted files forced into daylight, orders to sabotage peace talks spilling across translation software into hard evidence. If things moved fast enough, The Kreth would broadcast their find on secured diplomatic channels before the Rylkath could scrub anything. That was the plan in his head. Plans were fickle things, but this one had momentum. The Predator's head appeared in the cockpit doorway, its top pair of hands gripping the frame. Mark turned his chair halfway. It sniffed the air, as if catching a scent that wasn't there for human noses. Then it stepped inside, slow, deliberate, the deck creaking faintly under its weight. It didn't touch him. Just settled beside the seat, massive shoulders nearly level with his head. The posture wasn't aggressive, more like a guard dog claiming a vantage point. "Guess you're in this now too," Mark murmured. The Predator gave no sign of understanding the words, but it stayed. An hour later, his comm crackled with a coded burst, short, tight, and unmistakably Kreth military encryption. It was a priority alert routed through every vessel in range. The peace talks were under threat from a confirmed Rylkath plot. Evidence in custody. Negotiators advised to remain under maximum security until further notice. Mark's chest eased for the first time in half a day. The Daggerwind crew wouldn't be talking their way out of that. But relief came with its own urgency. The alert would reach Geneva, but without his first-hand account and the link between the overheard plan and his father's role, the humans might underestimate the personal risk. Sabotage plots rarely ended with just one move. He adjusted course for Earth, pushing the shuttle's drives into the upper range of safe burn. It wasn't a military craft. Prolonged overthrust would cook the maneuvering coils. But he could buy himself a few extra hours if he kept the heat levels just below the warning threshold. Halfway through the burn, the Predator stirred. Its head snapped toward the portside bulkhead, every muscle rigid. The deep rumble returned, vibrating through the confined space. Mark's hand went to the pistol instinctively. "What is it?" The Predator didn't answer, of course, but its stance shifted to a defensive crouch. The internal sensors showed nothing, no breach, no lifeform signatures beyond their own. Then, faintly, he caught it, a metallic clink from the aft compartments. He unbuckled and moved toward the sound, Predator following in a low stalk. His boots were silent against the deck, but he could feel each vibration through the soles, something shifting weight carefully, trying not to be heard. Rounding the corner into the storage alcove, he saw it. The maintenance hatch to the outer service conduit was ajar, a fine trace of frost along its edges. That hatch had been sealed before launch. Mark's breath tightened. The Rylkath must have slipped a second package aboard a backup plan in case the Predator failed. Saboteurs liked redundancy. The Predator stepped past him, all four arms flexed, and sniffed near the hatch. It growled low, then struck not blindly, but with precision, yanking the panel wide and lunging inside. A sharp yelp in a language Mark didn't know cut through the air, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged out. A Rylkath, smaller than the others he'd seen, tumbled onto the deck, claws scrabbling. Its left arm was bent awkwardly, likely dislocated by the Predator's grip. Mark aimed the pistol center mass. "Don't move." The spy froze, panting hard, eyes flicking between Mark and the towering creature. The Predator didn't attack again. It simply loomed over the captive, upper arms crossed in a strangely human-like assertion of dominance. Mark kept his voice cold. "You were going to finish the job your friend started?" The Rylkath didn't answer, but the set of its jaw was enough. Mark didn't waste time. He cuffed the spy's good arm to an overhead rail, checked the injury, it was indeed a clean dislocation, swelling already starting, and applied a padded sling from the med kit. Relocating it here would risk tearing tissue without anesthesia, and he wasn't about to prioritize enemy comfort over restraint. When he stepped back, the Predator was still watching the Rylkath like a statue carved from nightmares. Mark returned to the cockpit, the weight of urgency heavier now. If the Daggerwind's crew had planted one operative aboard, they could have planted more. Every minute to Earth mattered. The Predator padded in behind him, positioning itself at the doorway again, as if silently promising that no one else was getting through without going past it first. The Kreth alert played again on the comm, this time with a human voiceover. Geneva security was locking down the conference center. His father was safe for now, but only if Mark got there to close the last gap. The approach to Earth was a familiar routine deceleration burn, transponder handshake, atmospheric vector assignment. But Mark had never done it with a Kreth patrol ship shadowing him from the upper ionosphere and an apex predator breathing softly in the cockpit doorway. Geneva's security corridor was stacked with traffic: diplomatic shuttles, escort fighters, supply carriers rerouted from regular trade. He slipped into the queue, sending priority clearance codes through an encrypted burst. The Kreth ship ahead of him peeled away to dock at a military cradle. His assigned pad sat like a metal pedal jutting from the side of the conference tower's upper strut. As the clamps locked, he stood and faced the predator. "We're going inside. No sudden moves. Lots of people. They might not like you at first." It tilted its head, nostrils flaring, as if weighing the idea. When the hatch cycled, it followed without hesitation. The receiving bay went still. Uniformed guards, both human and Kreth, shifted grips on their weapons. The predator didn't flinch, but it stayed half a step behind Mark, its upper arms folded, lower arms loose at its sides. A man in a tailored dark suit strode across the deck. The lines in his face were deeper than the last time Mark had seen him in person, but the eyes were unchanged, sharp, measuring, always a few steps ahead. "Mark," his father said. The word carried relief and a layer of questions. His gaze flicked to the predator. "That's unexpected." "Long story," Mark replied. "Better told after you see what I brought." Two security officers took the cuffed Rylkath from the shuttle under guard, careful to keep distance from the predator. The prisoner hissed something guttural but stayed compliant, its injured arm still in the sling. In a secure conference chamber, Mark laid it out: the overheard plan, the Daggerwind's falsified fuel gauge, the predator in the cargo hold, the captured saboteur. Kreth envoys listened in stony silence, while human intelligence officers cross-referenced the Kreth's boarding logs from the Daggerwind. The timestamps aligned perfectly. "This confirms the orders we pulled from their nav systems," the Kreth liaison said, tapping a claw against the datapad. "Joint tribunal jurisdiction applies." Mark's father nodded. "Then the peace talks can proceed without the shadow of a second strike. We present this to both delegations, together." It happened that same afternoon. In the grand chamber overlooking Lake Geneva, the footage from the Daggerwind's databanks played across a split display, Rylkath crew discussing the frame job, encrypted orders decoded and authenticated. No delegation could ignore it. The treaty session that followed was brief by diplomatic standards: mutual trade access, joint anti-smuggling patrols, weapons trafficking bans, and a shared stance against proxy conflicts. The Rylkath's war economy would bleed slow but sure. When the signing was done, applause filled the chamber. Mark didn't join in. He was in the observation gallery, Predator seated beside him like an immovable statue, watching the leaders put pen to page. Afterward, his father found him again in the quieter corridors outside. "You didn't just fix a ship this time, Mark. You saved the talks." Mark shook his head. "The Kreth patrol did the heavy lifting. I just gave them a chance to get there." His father's gaze lingered on the predator. "Is it staying with you?" "It hasn't left my side since it figured out who I was." He rested a hand against the scaled shoulder. The predator leaned fractionally into the contact. "It's not a weapon anymore." A week later, after the joint tribunal sentenced the Daggerwind crew to a remote labor colony far from any hyperspace lanes, Mark was back at the outpost. The predator had adapted to station life with surprising ease, though it shadowed him everywhere. Engineering bays, repair calls, even the mess hall. Word spread fast. Crews gave them a wide berth, but curiosity replaced fear in most faces. One evening, while logging a supply manifest, he caught the predator crouched near a viewport, staring out at the drifting constellations. It made a low sound, not the rumble of warning, but something softer. "You could go," Mark said quietly. "Find whatever's left of your own kind." It looked back at him, slow and deliberate, then settled into a coil on the deck, eyes half-lidded. The choice was made. Mark smiled faintly. In a galaxy where alliances were fragile and threats took 1,000 shapes, he had a bodyguard no one had sent and no one could buy. Sometimes the deadliest predator wasn't an enemy at all.